Violence and violence-related behavior have been a continuous factor in all societies, modern and ancient. And though, unlike our forefathers, we have evolved to seek more peaceful measures to resolve our differences. Wars, the ultimate act of violence against humanity, have been minimized, and though our planet is far from the utopian dream most want it to be, we've taken incredible leaps forward to fight back the reptilian urge to simply maim or kill that which we don't agree with. Welcome to Geekafrique. Today we want to further the long-running discussion about violent video games and the effect it may have on the youth. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not on a campaign to bash any titles for their violence or gore, as I still do firmly believe in artistic expression, but I do want to address something that has bothered me for a fair amount of time. I have spent a few years working in the retail sector of gaming, and though I've processed thousands of transactions, and occasionally I've had a few moments where I pause to ask, could this have a negative effect on the person, specifically young person receiving this? Now, standard policy dictates we explain the content and display age rating, but the overall attitude towards this in Africa is an aloof disinterest. As someone in retail, it becomes difficult to try and explain any potential negative effects this may have on your child. I simply call this earning respect in relation to our meager earning, as they are usually in a healthier financial position. But I digress. The reason I wanted to do a deeper dive into this was due to a recent shift in my thought process brought on by a YouTube channel I've grown to appreciate, and actually ask exactly why do violent video games always seem to be frequently blamed for certain atrocious acts, and further stress on the basic tenuous links by asking this: if this is the case, why aren't all gamers violent psychopaths? Now, to try and do this in a simple way, I've decided to divide this into three simple basic paths. I respect that multiple external factors will always play, but like a murder mystery, the police must always begin with a base structure and an idea of the mindset of the perp before constructing around the case. So as much as I respect aspects like potentially dangerous mental illness, I will need to exclude it to better assess my point. A. Physical aspect. Now I admit, it is seemingly most obvious, but it is worth noting. The simplest will be the negative. Excessive gaming, example 10 hours plus day, will undoubtedly pose a negative health risk on the child or adolescent, as sitting still constantly could pose a basic health and fitness problem for the child. Gamers, especially young ones, don't feel to tend to stress on their body, as they tend to place themselves in awkward positions in order to help affect the stationary effect, minimizing their overall movement. But long-term effects have shown strong correlation between back problems and excessive gaming. This can naturally affect a child's fitness and metabolism levels, as they forego exercise of any kind for any long-winded constant gaming sessions, i.e. 10 hours or 8 hours plus in a day, will have notable long-term effects. On the plus side though, gaming for a reasonable amount of time with healthy periodic breaks, a solid diet and a good intake of water has shown that there have been no extreme long-term effects. Other known recordable benefits have been that gamers have also been generally tended to show a much stronger visual spatial awareness. Gamers have also shown a stronger ability to multitask. Gamers have also shown that they have an overall better reaction speed, and gamers have also shown a stronger visual attention. Now, some of the above points are fairly common arguments, but I feel that if they possessed a necessary place in the discussion. The social aspect. Now, another thing that needs to be made clear: not every video game that has a social interaction aspect is violent. For example, FIFA allows communication between players online without the game consisting of any violence. So when researching this aspect, I tended to make note of two key words that continuously show themselves in relation to adolescent social development. Ultimately, the argument rotated between prosocial and antisocial behavior patterns. Prosocial behavior, according to Eisenberg and Mewson, is defined as voluntary actions that are intended to help or benefit another group or individual. This ultimately means that an act of kindness, with the ultimate aim of advancing or assisting others, could be seen as prosocial. Now, in the same articles, I did come across a line that I felt was at natural odds with my experiences in the gaming community. Exposure to video game violence resulted in a lack of prosocial behavior and empathy. Now, I'll be honest, I raised an eyebrow in this line. I can safely say I cannot quantify the number of times of globally heartwarming stories I've heard about where gamers have been willing what gamers have been ultimately willing to do for each other. If you'd like a stronger representation, I suggest taking a look at GameRanks and search for any heartwarming gaming stories. There are many, including the Fuel Rats, a group of gamers in Elite Dangerous who dedicated hours, if not days, of their personal time to help save others, stranded gamers who ran out of fuel and are stuck in digital space, increasing the risk of them quitting and potentially wasting their invested time in their saves. There's also Tim Sweeney donating ever-increasingly large sums to help rebuild the rainforest. Large space of the gaming community over social sites like Discord, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, who've supported each other through difficult times, and so much more. There are sadly multiple examples of antisocial behaviors gamers have a tendency to develop, especially in the online space. Antisocial behavior refers to a heterogeneous set of actions outside of norms, rules, or laws of the social group, in which the subject develops, example, physical aggression or theft. Now, the end point of my last sentence is one of my crux arguments, i.e., is aggression scaled? Now, the range of antisocial behaviors we tend to notice online generally follow the more lexicon term of toxic. Toxic or toxicity is the urbanized description of people, but in our example is gamers who tend to display negative traits that tend to further separate them from the gaming community. Sadly, the list of potential toxic behaviors is far too long to list off, so I will mention a few. Number 1. Spamming. Sending your online opponent a series of distractive or abusive emails over intimidation to throw your opponent off. Number 2. Rage quitting. The act of abandoning an online game that you are losing to avoid solidifying the results on your online record, ultimately killing the spirit of competition and ruining the game. Number 3. General abuse. This may be ultimately widely applicable, but I'm looking at players who tend to attack teammates in terms of the heat of the moment during a poor moment in a game. These are but a few of the general issues reported among more pressing issues like online racism, sexism, cultural appropriation, and a list of others. The list literally goes on and tends to lean to an increasingly trending attitude towards the more savage or toxic online behavior, especially on social media platforms. This now brings me to my final and key point of the discussion. Does this form of media tend to create or nurture a call to action or impulsive reaction amongst the younger gamers? Will you act out violently if exposed to violent media? The mental aspect. So I believe this is the crux point of the discussion. It is also proven to be the most difficult to accurately research. So ultimately, I have always pondered about the dual concepts of disposition and obsession. Now, the hardest part has been accurately trying to tie these concepts together to further explain my position. So with a bit of research, I ultimately found this the most effective explanation. Disposition. A person's inherent qualities of mind and character. Now, when factoring this in, it creates a potentially clearer idea of the potentially negative effects. For example, a young, angry child with a tendency of relatively disruptive or violent behavior patterns would classify fairly simply as a possible candidate for increased violence behavior after intense concession. Certain personality aspects relating to that are generally noted relatively early and would generally assume the child a considerably higher risk. The flaw with certain amounts of research is that due to it not factoring in alternate factors, it creates only a possibility. In this argument, now, obsession is definitely a stronger player when it comes to a stronger choice of a child acting out any visualized acts. Passionate gamers have a tendency of being considerably and notably extreme in their attitudes toward their beloved titles. This type of passion has had negative effects in the past. A horrendous example is that of the Columbine massacre. Now, there were many other extreme factors involved in the Columbine, but reason is a case is so influential and important is that it sparked the serious discussion and about the levels of violence in video games. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were cited as being avid fans of the first-person shooter Doom, and were apparently quoted as saying it would be just like Doom. If taken at face value, it ultimately exposes the ever-tipping scales of fandom passion and how it can ever be expressed. If in its positive, it mostly manifests in visual emotional representations such as tweets, pizzas being delivered to the offices, tattoos, crowdfunding achievements, peaceful protesting, and even cultural representation for an ever-expanding fan base. At its worst though, it creates animosity, anger, tribalistic attitudes, and in its worst case scenarios, possibly injury or death. So, how do I see it? It's a pretty complex picture, and it definitely needs more effective research as psychology and video game continue to intertwine. But I would say the attempt to control any of these factors would be similar to attempting to control the human mind, and simply erasing violent video games and content through stronger censorship would simply result in the censorship of freedom and ultimately a move to a sketchy, unregulated black market which will develop in retaliation and asking for more graphically and mentally disturbing games to flood into the hands of the youth. It's always simple to simply follow the age ratings and check on the content of the game, but more importantly, understand that like any form of entertainment you introduce your children to, there is always a dual risk. It is never simply completely there or gone. It is, just as it has always been, potentially a roll of the dice. This has been your boy Tav from Geekafrique, and this has been a lot more serious than I'm used to. And as you can see, I'm bad at reading from scripts. So please like, share, and subscribe if you thought this was informative. And yes, please stay tuned to Geekafrique.